Welcome back. The press is not an enemy of the people. It is the people's watchdog. This year alone, independent monitoring shows a worrying spike in attacks, arrest and harassment of reporters across the country. Between January and October 2025, there were 69 verified incidents against journalists, with state actors, including police officers, responsible for the bulk of the abuses. Now, this is not lawlessness at the margins. It is a systemic problem that corrodes public trust and closes civic space. Now, don't forget, too, that here at News Central, we've also had a fair share of what we're talking about. But joining us to x-ray this development as we discuss the importance of a free press to the society is the Executive Director, Journalists for Human Rights. We do have Bill Killorn, who joins us here in the studio, and Director of African Programs, Journalists for Human Rights, Mustapha Dumbuya, joins us as well. We do have both guests here in the studio. Welcome. Good morning.
Welcome. Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Great. We're talking journalists. Well, the rights of journalists in Africa in 2025, particularly the various limiting hurdles preventing journalists like us from doing our jobs due to intimidation has been a recurring issue, and also press freedom has been under attack across the continent. Having both of you gentlemen here, let's start off first by asking, how can such be solved when the state or state actors commit these atrocities against the journalists? So let me start off first with you, Mustapha.
Thank you so much, and once more thanks for having us. The erosion of press freedom is definitely interlinked with erosions in democratic practices generally across the world. And there are statistics showing that in recent times, just 6 people percent actually live in what is considered as a full democracy. So what that tells you is that a lot of countries that claim or project to be democratic states are really not at this moment anymore, if you want to go by the values that defines the way the states are run. And the press itself, you know, and I give that kind of introduction because the press operates better in a democratic states. You know, it provides an accountability mechanism and structure, holding power to account, speaking truth to power. And sadly, across the world, and in Africa specifically, leaders are growing more and more autocratic, and meaning they don't want to be questioned. They don't want to be challenged. And who are you going to crack down on? And who ask these difficult questions often are journalists. And sadly, this is why journalists are becoming a much more a target. And you could see from Tanzania to Kenya to Nigeria and Cameroon, where we recently had elections, journalists are constantly being targeted, harassed, and intimidated for doing their jobs. You know, it's making the space, you know, who suffers? The public. Because when journalists are not able to do their work, the public is deprived of information. The public is deprived of information that will help them make informed choices about their day-to-day life.
Okay. You mentioned 6.6% being the percentage of countries that are practicing actual democracy, because in countries where actual democracy thrives, we then see the press able to do the job better. I'll come to Bill and ask, you know, to give an example of some of these countries, but also when we talk about abusing the rights of journalists, what does that picture look like?
So I think that's a great question, and I'd like to start by saying that, you know, this isn't a problem that's unique to Africa or African countries. This is a global problem. We're seeing the erosion of media freedoms across the world. In fact, the Reporters Without Borders, they do an annual index on media freedoms around the world. And the most recent was the most grim that they've ever had in the history of doing the index. Over 75% of the world's population live in countries where media freedom is either dangerous or incredibly challenging. And that is a global issue. And it is not just things like what we think about often when we think about crackdown on freedom of press, attacking journalists, jailing journalists, but it's also increased polarization of media, a lack of information getting out to the population, and also competing with social media platforms or other technological advances that maybe don't have the strong ethics of a traditional journalism outlet. Maybe there's no fact checking. So the challenge is real, and to get to your point, the point of your question, we at Journalists for Human Rights really believe that there is a strong line connecting the state of democracy globally and the state of media freedom globally. Yeah. You see, if press freedoms is going down, you know, it's not good for the state of democracies worldwide as well.
So, staying with you, Bill, what are the dangers? Because people might not see it clearly, though, the dangers of having press freedom stifled and a country where press freedoms, the media is not allowed to thrive. What are the inherent dangers for citizens of that country?
I think it goes to, I think that's a very good question. I think it goes to the fundamental role of journalism in a society. Is journalists are there for the people, to ask the questions that the people don't have the opportunity to ask. The average citizen doesn't have the opportunity to follow everything that's happening in government, to follow every decision that a government is making, to follow every decision that a business is making, and how it impacts them. They rely on journalists to do that research, to ask the tough questions and report back to them as citizens so they can be informed and then make decisions based on that information that the journalists have provided them. The role of journalists, the role of you here today is to inform the public and help them be better engaged citizens.
Okay, let's come back to Mustapha and talk about where the state is very complicit in areas of suppressing human rights freedom. And I want you to speak to that in terms of, oftentimes we hear complaints of the police being used, of the military being used to stifle the rights of journalists. So can you speak to that, maybe from information you've gathered from your research on how prevalent this is?
And sadly, the states, or sometimes non-state actors, the ones directly, we cannot beat about the bush. They're the ones directly impacting on the rights and the atmosphere in which journalists work. Within the scope of our work at JHR is often to remind the states of their obligation. States do have obligations, and these are both within domestic laws as well as international laws. States across Africa are mostly obligated based on international human rights law, whether within the UN systems, or within the African Union systems as well. They always sign up and they always commit to protecting journalists, to ensuring that there is political participation, and to also ensure that journalists are able to conduct the affairs of their work without any pressure or any oppression in this case as well. But sadly, it's not the case, as we could see in Kenya. I mean, if we speak specifically for African context, in Kenya, where when youth were protesting at the Gen Z protest, journalists became victims because they were trying to tell the story. Journalists were out there with their cameras, with their recorders, and security agencies specifically went after journalists. What at the same thing that you saw in Tanzania, where security agencies were specifically targeted the press, specifically targeted journalists. And we know why they do that. They do that because they don't want the truth to be out. And journalists have a duty as well, as risky as it is, as challenging as it is. Journalists in Africa, and I have nothing but respect and admiration for all of the journalists for the work that you do. With all this risk, with all the challenges, journalists continue to wake up every morning and brave these challenges with their cameras, with their recorders, with their notebooks, to be out there to inform the people. And just to allude to what my colleague Bill mentioned earlier, that it's threatening, it's challenging for journalists because someone somewhere doesn't want the truth to be told. And journalists have a duty to make sure that truth is out. We always say back in the day in journalism school to see if you're not able to hold the state accountable, power accountable, then anything else is not really news, but it's public relations. And I'm sure good journalists know the difference between what is PR and what is news.
And what is not.
Exactly. That's a very challenging thing to do.
All right, Bill, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think just add that it works both ways. Like, good journalism is also a tool for a good government, because journalists show the government what the people care about, what's not working in society, what policies are failing, what policies need to be amended. So that's why it's such an important part of a strong democracy, because that is instant feedback on how the government is doing with the journalists are providing that information.
Sadly, most of the governments in some of the countries you've mentioned seem to disagree with that, especially when journalists put it out there that these are the things that are not working. In Kenya, social media ban. In other countries, we've seen that.
Too, for a minute, the internet was shut out.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And so, but let me ask you, what's the role of the National Human Rights Commission? How best can they play a role so strong that they can protect journalists, especially in this day and time? Bill?
So I think I can speak broadly about the type of work that an agency like that can do. I think bringing people together to whether it be journalists, civil society, government officials, security officials, and helping them understand the role of journalism and the role of journalists, and they're not a threat. They're actually an integral part of society, integral part of a democracy. I think we journalists, human rights, are big believers in convening and having those conversations. I think to get to the question you asked earlier, we have been successful bringing military to the table and having them meet with journalists in an off-the-record format, just to get to know them and understand that they have a job to do. They're reporting for the people, and that they're not a threat to the military or to the government. It's actually a tool that they can use.
Now, Mustapha, coming to 2025, the current world we live in, journalism has changed. It's different from what was obtainable 40, 50 years ago. With the advent of technology, we now have what you call citizen journalists. There's AI, and there's also proliferation of fake news. My question to you is, do these things complement or work against journalists? Because you have a citizen journalist, for example, you just pick up a camera, the proliferation of technology, and anybody goes out there without going to journalism school and knowing the ethics of the profession. But you wouldn't also allow a citizen pilot, for example, to fly. You won't get on a plane that is being piloted by citizen pilots. So looking at technology and AI tools, citizen journalists, fake news, does this technology work for or against the 21st century journalist, the modern day journalist? Yes.
I mean, in an ideal world, I will respond to your question with a yes and no. A yes because it's helped for information to be out, for us to liberalize information. People have access to information without monopolizing it. I mean, I say monopolize it because we had a time in the past when we only had journalists. We had a time in the past.
Government information service,
Government information services, right? Which now became like corporations, and they pretty much became a mouthpiece of the state. The people didn't have a say to participate. Whatever the the government service operation said went by then. Today it's changing because everyone had access to the phone, to the internet, and they share information. But with that also comes new threats. And I will speak to those threats now. Everyone is able to sit in their living room and sometimes, and tweet out or share information. And often that kind of information, by the time a professional press is able to post, it takes a while to send a team to the field, to do those interviews, to process those interviews. And people are living in a fast-paced world where we already have the information. But also that also creates a platform upon you to spread a lot of information that is not true. But also people who share this information today, I think we have a name for them, they're called bloggers. And these bloggers also could be hired, could also be manipulated, and it could actually carry a specific political agenda, and which makes it dangerous. And also the public is not able to differentiate between the bloggers and the journalists. So to respond to the question, it makes it it creates conflict and confusion for the public. So this is what I think should be done. And I think there needs to be more investment on media literacy, education for the public, so people know what is journalism and what's not. what is factual and what's not.
What is WhatsApp news and what is reality?
What is reality exactly? So people are able to, we should be able to, and sadly there's not much investment in that. And I think government actually should take a lead in investing in educating the public, in educating right from school. It should be, media literacy must be introduced right from high school or even primary school. Kids should be able to understand the different media outlets that exist. They should be able to understand how to process information they find online, and they should be able to learn how to differentiate. There are all these tools these days, but it's still been limited to journalism, to journalists only. Journalists have been trained how to do fact checking, but I think the public should be also given those skills these days. So when you find something on your X feed or your Facebook or whatever social media you follow, you should be able to know the steps to take to verify that. And this is kind of work that we're trying to do.
I think it should even be in the educational curriculum.
That's what he suggested from secondary school to primary school. But I want to follow up to the question that he's just asked. Because this is the excuse that some governments put forward when they then create laws
clamp
down the rights of citizens and journalists in doing their job. And an example would be those who have pushed back against the Cybercrime Act. And they've said that this is stifling journalists from doing their job. What the government will tell you that they are trying to protect the citizens from things like defamation and the like. So how do we find that divide? And is that a good enough reason for laws, that protect laws like the Cybercrime Act?
I think the cybercrime laws are very dangerous. And what they have done, I think government, it's a wave across Africa, and I've seen it in different countries. Governments are replacing what they used to be called defamation laws that criminalizes speech with cybercrime laws. But this time around, they reintroduce it with the, on the surface, we are fighting crime online. We're trying to end child pornography, we're trying to track criminals who conduct crimes online. But underneath that, you always find clauses in the cyber, and it's a pattern across. You should take up and read all the new cybercrime laws across continents. Yeah, all of them have clauses, and there are specific clauses that actually criminalizes speech. So at the end of the day, you only replace one law with a new law, because the new frontier of control is the defamation laws used to exist primarily for the print media, and then they extended it to broadcast media. But governments are realizing that journalists are getting more professional, more trained, and often you may not be able to slap defamation laws on journalists. They operate, they operate professionally.
Especially with the word allegedly.
Allegedly. And now they are going, because the new frontier of control, the new sphere of is online. So basically, the cybercrime laws have been created, most of them, to stifle free speech.
I want Bill to speak to that as well, because we've spoken about it from the African context. Is that a global challenge?
Yeah, I think that I was just going to weigh in and say, we can look at examples of countries where these laws have been put in place in the past and what has happened since. And a great example is looking at journalist Maria Reza in the Philippines, who has won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work as a journalist. And while she was working under Duterte, he was using these cyber laws to try to silence her and her media outlet Rappler. So I think that is an example of the slippery slope that you can get into as you start to enact laws like this.
Now, staying with you, Bill, governments around the world have often used national security and disinformation laws to justify or harass journalists. What's the thin line between...
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
They're trying to stifle your voice.
Yes. How do we separate national security and true journalism?
I think that's a very good question, and unfortunately, I don't think there's very many easy answers. I think the prevalence, as we talked earlier about the technology advances of platforms like Facebook, like WhatsApp, as those get bigger, the spread of disinformation is going to increase. And we see that in countries all around the world. In Canada, where I come from, it's an issue. We also have projects in Europe working with Belarusian journalists, and they're dealing with it. There is no easy fix, which is why I'm also very skeptical of these laws, because anyone who presents an easy fix to a problem that we're dealing with all over the world, you have to meet with some sort of skepticism.
Yeah.
I mean, today we talked about Australia, for example, and the potential of Australia to work on limiting access to social media to children, I think they said above 16 years. And the pushback that we get when we see posts like that is people saying they're trying to steal our data, they're trying to suppress us first. They start with children, then they go to the adults, and this is a way to ensure that there's no anonymity digitally. Do you agree with such arguments, Bill?
I think it's a fascinating debate and one worth having, because I think we need to recognize that this is still new technology, and we don't have all the answers. There's still more study required, and still more information that we need to gather. But I think we also need to be aware that many children who are using these technologies aren't fully aware of the ramifications that can haunt them for the rest of their lives as they engage on these platforms, and also the predators that are there looking for children. So I think it's a debate worth having, and one that more countries should be examining.
All right, let's look at another aspect of it, the aspect of journalists being attacked. What could this mean in the near future if we have more journalists going through processes of being attacked, repressed, and so on and so forth? Mustapha, let me come to you. Is there any risk in the near future, especially in areas that are bedeviled with insecurity, or there's some form of upheavals here and there? You did mention Kenya. We've also seen Tanzania. We've seen Cameroon and the likes.
There is an apparent risk if journalists continue to get attacked. And the first thing that comes to mind will be there will be less and less credible information shared out, because the more challenging, the difficult it becomes for journalists to go out in the field to report the news, to tell the stories. You leave that space, you leave a vacuum. And when you leave a vacuum, often nature doesn't allow a vacuum, and other people are going to go into that space. This is why you've seen the rise of social media, of citizen journalists, because someone needs to share that information anyways. And so, but when it's being shared by people who don't have the training, who don't have the skills, who are not bound by any ethics or any professional values, then yes, you stand the risk of flooding the information space with misinformation, with misleading information. And sadly, in some parts of the world, misinformation or disinformation in particular could be a matter of life and death. I have been in countries where people share misinformation, disinformation that the president of that country was dead, and that immediately created a reaction or panic across the country. So again, journalists are useful. The work that journalists do is critical, and the states must protect journalists. It's actually a duty. The state has a duty to protect journalists. And when I say the states here, I'm speaking in the broader sense of the state, the government and its agencies, including its security agencies, like the police and the judicial system of each country, have an obligation to protect journalists. Again, for journalists as well, to whom much is given, much is also expected, right? We also have a professional and a moral duty to ensure that we do our work professionally, to ensure that we seek the truth and nothing else but the truth, to ensure that we don't use the tools and the access, because it's a privilege to be a journalist. You get to access spaces.
So I just need to butt in there. You've highlighted a very key problem in the media, and I also like Bill to chime in on this one. Because most journalists have the tools, we're also starting to see, we just need to also be honest amongst ourselves that some journalists are starting to betray the profession, in the sense that we did see what happened in the BBC, and 2 people had to resign, where you could doctor some true reality videos or footage. How can that also become a problem with the profession, in line with enabling the government to now hound on journalists, looking at the fact that they may also be conniving with some of their counterparts?
That's a very strong point. I think I would go back to what I said at the beginning of our conversation about looking at the state of journalism globally, the polarization of media, the doing journalism just for one audience and not for everybody leads to problems like the one you just addressed, and it leads to the erosion of trust from the public. I think and part of that has been the competition of all the different platforms that are out there, and the pressure that's put on journalists to tell stories to maximize the audiences. But we need to get back to those ethics and building that trust, because you'll see as the trust for journalism goes down, the state of journalism goes down, and the state of democracy goes down.
Are there countries that have gotten it right and that have maybe put measures that we can learn from and say, if this country is doing this, we can implement this?
I think it's just looking at the current state. There's only a few countries that get top marks. I think it's only about 4 countries in the world that are getting top marks from the RSF World Press Freedom Index. So I think that what that means is there's a lot of work to do, and the challenges are only going to get more difficult. We're looking at deep fakes and AI and how that's going to play into the misinformation that's out there. So I think just as soon as we understand how to deal with one problem, there's another problem on the horizon. So it's going to take a lot of work, and hopefully sharing ideas, sharing successes amongst journalists internationally could help.
Talking about sharing ideas and sharing successes, I mean, no country is an island and no profession is an island. We collaborate and mix around. Are there effective global mechanism or alliances available for journalists to do peer reviews and also share ideas beyond Journalists Without Borders?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of platforms that exist right now, and I could speak about for each country. There are systems like I'm sure like Nigeria has, Nigerian Union of Journalists.
Yes.
It has different countries, and the existence of these platforms is really to be more like a peer learning space, right? So they're not just a welfare-led organization that protects and raise awareness about the rights of journalists, but they should also provide a platform for learning and exchange. And if you go beyond this country-specific, there are also regional bodies like that. So now, I mean, from where we are at JHL, because we have a presence across the world, and in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Northern Africa, as well as Europe and North America, we also try to kind of like often bring the different people we work with across the globe in spaces where they could share, they could learn from each other best practices. So there are different,
So your membership is open to journalists, your organization?
So we don't specifically actually run membership.
Oh, okay.
So we are more like, we started off as a media capacity or strengthening organization. So we do
Okay.
So but then we move beyond that to, so you don't have to apply to be a member. It could be New Central and JHL working together to support journalists, for instance.
Definitely in the offing.
Central.
Definitely in the offing.
I think you've identified an opportunity, because
Yes.
I think journalists need to do a better job of connecting globally with the industry and their counterparts. And I always point, a great example of that is a lot of Western media outlets, when they're covering international stories, they send a Canadian journalist there to cover it. But we know that there's journalists in that country that are qualified to cover it. So why not build those bridges? And
Exactly.
I go back that the challenges that journalists face are not unique to country. They are global issues, and the more we can work together to address them, the better off we'll be.
I mean, my final question would be, I like what Journalists for Human Rights is doing in terms of educating and creating forum for journalists around the world to speak and learn best practices from each other. Are there also opportunities to speak up when certain journalists have been wrongfully detained or their rights have been stripped off them. You have opportunities to fight and speak for journalists as well, like in particular cases.
So one thing that we have done in certain countries to address that issue is we form a coalition of journalists. And if one journalist is attacked or silenced, everyone in the coalition sheds light on it. So it's, it's not just that particular media outlet that's covering it. It is every media outlet across the country covering what happened to that journalist. And there are organizations that also do that on an international scale. But I think, again, that's an opportunity.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Executive Director, Journalist for Human Rights, Bill Killorn, and of course, Director of African Programs, Journalist for Human Rights, Mustapha Dumbuya. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
We look forward
Thank you for having
to
us.
future
Thanks for
partnerships.
having us. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we need to talk some more. And I like the point. I think the point I'm taking away is that we need to start teaching from the kindergarten, primary,
Media
secondary,
literacy.
and let people know who journalists are, and
how to
their job.
identify.
People is already doing this, and they've been doing it for so long. Finland, and it's surprising that they always top the press freedom index because Finland already teaches kids from school about media literacy. I visited a few schools in like Helsinki, and this is like 10 years ago, and they were teaching kids media literacy in schools already.
They're always one of the happiest
that's
countries in the world.
Exactly.
Finland is on my bucket list for 2026.
You should go.
Yeah, beginning of 2026. Thank you, gentlemen, for
Thank you so
joining
much.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience, the virtual audience, physical audience, for joining us today on Breakfast Central.